Dawn rose blood-red over the black sands of Iwo Jima on February 23, 1945. The air was thick with sulfur and the smell of burning oil. From the sea, the thunder of naval guns pounded Mount Suribachi, each salvo shaking the volcanic island like a living, breathing monster. Thousands of Marines crouched behind what little cover the beach offered. Shell holes twisted wreckage and the corpses of comrades who had fallen hours before. Above them, the Japanese pillboxes spat fire. The rattle of Nambu machine guns echoed from unseen crevices, cutting through the surf like razors. It was here that Private First Class Herschel Woodrow Williams, a stocky farm boy from West Virginia, was asked the impossible. U.S. Marine Corps After Action Report, Feb 1945. His commanding officer pointed toward the concrete fortifications that dominated the ridge. Each bunker was an iron womb of death, bristling with rifles and grenades connected by tunnels, impervious to artillery. "Can you do anything with flamethrowers against those pillboxes?" he asked. The question hung in the sulphurous air. Williams's answer was quiet, almost lost under the crash of mortars. "I will try." Marine Division Operations Journal, 1945. The men around him were exhausted. In just 3 days, nearly 7,000 Marines had fallen, dead, wounded, or missing. Every attempt to advance had been shredded by overlapping Japanese fields of fire. The island, only 8 square miles of ashen rock, had become a slaughterhouse. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had ordered his troops to fight from underground, refusing the banzai charges that had cost lives on other islands. Instead, his soldiers became ghosts, surfacing only long enough to kill before vanishing again. Japanese defense plans, Central Pacific Area Command, 1944. To the Americans offshore, the bombardment had seemed overwhelming. 70,000 shells, 110 carrier aircraft, and 4 battleships had rained steel upon the island for 72 hours. Yet when the Marines stormed ashore on February 19th, machine gun fire met them instantly. The bombardment had barely scratched the subterranean fortress. The terrain itself, ash that swallowed men to their knees, made digging foxholes almost impossible. Even tanks bogged down, their treads spinning helplessly in the sand. U.S. Navy Action Report, 1945. The 3rd Marine Division, to which Williams belonged, had been held in reserve during the first days of fighting. When they finally landed, they faced a battlefield already baptized in flame. Dead men lay where they'd fallen, rifles still clutched in lifeless hands. The air shimmered with heat from burning fuel and the molten core of the island's volcanic heart. Marines called it Hell's Beach. Eyewitness account, CPLR Anderson Diary, Feb 1945. Williams was 21. Before the war, he had driven a truck in Fairmont, West Virginia. He had volunteered for the Marines because the uniform, as he later joked, looked sharper than the Army's. But now, staring across that open killing ground, there was nothing glamorous about it. He was one of the few men trained with the new M2 flamethrower, a brutal weapon that could project burning gasoline over 40 yards. Yet it was also a suicide tool. The fuel tanks made its operator a walking bomb. Technical Training Manual TM 7207, 1944. As the order came down, Williams gathered 4 riflemen. Their job, to lay down suppressive fire while he crawled forward with the 70-pound flamethrower strapped to his back. One after another, the men fell around him. 2 were killed outright, struck by bursts from a concealed machine gun. Williams kept moving, the sand swallowing his boots, his face blackened with soot. He reached the first pillbox, pressed against its concrete flank and pulled the trigger. A stream of fire roared out, a living dragon's tongue. Inside, the bunker exploded in a furnace of screams and smoke. U.S. Marine Corps Battlefield Narrative, 1945. For nearly 4 hours, Williams repeated the cycle. Advance, ignite, retreat, refuel, advance again. He burned through 7 flamethrowers that day, each emptied and discarded like a spent shell. Between attacks, he stumbled back through enemy fire to fetch another from the supply dumps on the beach. Machine gun rounds struck sparks from the tanks on his back, but somehow miraculously none ignited. Battalion After Action Debrief, 1945. To the Marines pinned down behind him, William's silhouette became a symbol of vengeance and hope. A lone figure walking through smoke, his weapon a torch of deliverance. When he cleared the 7th bunker, the line finally moved forward. The Marines poured through the breach he had carved with fire. U.S. Marine Command Chronicle, 1945. What few realized was that Iwo Jima was not just another island. It was the key to Japan's inner defenses, a strategic outpost halfway between Saipan and Tokyo. From its airfields, Japanese fighters intercepted American B-29 superfortresses, bombing the mainland. Capturing it would mean crippled Japanese radar coverage and a haven for damaged U.S. bombers returning from raids. The stakes were immense. The Japanese garrison numbered about 21,000 men, veterans of earlier campaigns, entrenched in 11 miles of tunnels and 1,500 bunkers. Against them stood more than 70,000 Marines from the 3rd, 4th and 5th Divisions, backed by naval power, unmatched in history. Yet numbers meant nothing here. The Japanese held the high ground, the tunnels, and the advantage of invisibility. U.S. Strategic Assessment of Volcanic Islands, 1946. Williams' action on that day was a microcosm of the entire Pacific War, a single man's resolve against an enemy fortified by years of preparation. He later admitted that he remembered almost nothing of the hours between his first and last assault, as though he had entered a trance of survival. The after-action report simply recorded, PFC Williams rendered invaluable service, eliminating multiple enemy strongpoints, thereby enabling company advance. U.S. Marine Division Citation Draft, 1945. By nightfall, the sky over Iwo Jima glowed red from burning fuel depots. The island's air was poison, thick with ash and the metallic tang of blood. Corpsmen dragged the wounded through surf that had turned black with oil. On the slopes of Suribachi, Marines raised their rifles in weary salute as the stars and stripes fluttered in the volcanic wind, a moment immortalized days later by Joe Rosenthal's camera. Associated Press War Dispatch, Feb 1945, but the fight was far from over. The Japanese counterattacked relentlessly at night, emerging from tunnels to cut down Marines in their sleep. Even as American lines advanced, the enemy's resistance only hardened. Entire platoons vanished in explosions when hidden munitions stores ignited beneath them. Each yard of ground was purchased with blood. U.S. Pacific Fleet War Diary, 1945. Williams and the remnants of his unit dug in, listening to the eerie stillness between mortar bursts. Somewhere below them, in the labyrinth of tunnels, Japanese soldiers waited. "They will never surrender," one sergeant muttered. He was right. When the battle finally ended on March 26, 1945, more than 6,800 Americans were dead, and nearly all 21,000 Japanese defenders had perished, many by their own hand. The island that had been expected to fall in 5 days had taken 5 weeks. U.S. Joint Operations Analysis, 1945. The cost was unbearable. Yet in the aftermath, one officer remembered the moment he had watched that lone flamethrower advance across the open killing ground. "That man broke their line," he said quietly. "That one man gave us the way through." Regimental Command Interview, 1945. In the weeks that followed, as Iwo Jima's airfields were cleared of mines and corpses, word spread among the divisions of the Marine with the Fireborn courage. Some called him the Fire Devil, others the Torchbearer. To Williams himself, the attention felt hollow. He had survived where others had not. 2 of the riflemen who had covered him were dead. Their names would never be carved in marble halls, but he swore he would carry them with him always. Personal Statement, H.W. Williams, 1946. What drove a man to walk into the mouth of hell armed only with a tank of fuel and a spark? The answer lay deeper than training or duty. It was something older, an instinct that flared when men realized that survival depended not on retreat, but on the courage to burn through fear itself. Combat Psychology Notes, U.S. Naval Medical Corps, 1946. As the smoke cleared and the island's fate was sealed, few yet understood that Williams' act was not just bravery, it was revelation. It showed how fire, when wielded by will and precision, could dismantle the strongest fortress. What began as one Marine's desperate stand would soon evolve into a tactical doctrine that rewrote the language of assault warfare. And somewhere beyond that, horizon beyond the ashes of Iwo Jima, another battle waited, where the secret behind his fireborn courage would ignite an entirely new kind of war. The island smoldered like a dying forge, but within its blackened craters, a new kind of weapon was being born, not of metal or chemistry alone, but of will. Herschel Woodrow Williams' weapon was not the flamethrower itself, but the way he wielded it. Deliberate, surgical, and unflinching. What most saw as a blunt tool of terror, he transformed into an instrument of precision warfare. U.S. Marine Technical Evaluation Report, March 1945. The Japanese had built Iwo Jima into a fortress city beneath the earth. Their pillboxes, steel-reinforced concrete with walls up to 5 feet thick, were connected by tunnels that stretched for 11 miles. They were designed to survive bombardment, to absorb explosions and keep firing. American artillery, naval guns and rockets had all failed to silence them. The island was a honeycomb of death. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Field Analysis, 1945. But the flamethrower, primitive in concept yet devastating in practice, bypassed every advantage of stone and steel. The M22 model used by Williams carried 4.75 gallons of a thickened gasoline mixture known as napalm, a recent invention from Harvard. Chemists Louis Fieser and E.B. Hirschberg propelled by nitrogen pressure at 3,000 psi. Its fiery stream reached 45 yards and burned at over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Technical Manual TM 7207, 1944. The weapons tanks and valves were hand-built by machinists at the Depot of Supplies in Philadelphia and refined by engineers from the Bureau of Ordnance. They learned to make the flame thicker, slower burning, so it could creep into the narrowest firing slit or tunnel entrance and suffocate what lay within. It wasn't just about fire, one marine engineer later explained. It was about stealing the air they breathed. Bureau of Ordnance Field Notes, 1945. Williams' mastery came from repetition. He had trained on Guam for months, cycling between flamethrower drills and demolition work. The two were intertwined. Demolitions cleared openings, flame cleared resistance. Yet training fields could not mimic the hellish geometry of Iwo Jima, where each pillbox was invisible until it killed. The key was movement. He learned to crawl, to use the terrain itself as cover, to strike where air vents betrayed hidden positions. Marine Demolition Training Report, 1944. Japanese soldiers, disciplined and fanatically loyal, had prepared countermeasures. They poured sand over the firing slits, mounted snipers to target tank valves, and lobbed grenades at the operators. But Williams adapted. He shifted low and fast, striking from angles that machine guns could not depress toward. Witnesses said he moved like smoke itself, appearing, igniting, vanishing. After-action eyewitness log, 3rd Marine Division, 1945. When he approached a bunker, he first mapped it in his head, where the embrasures faced, where the vents led. He knew the flame could snake through unseen cracks, rolling like liquid fire. Once it entered, it devoured oxygen, turning bunkers into furnaces. The screams that followed were brief. It was not cruelty that drove him, it was necessity. They would never surrender, he later said. There was no other way to end it. Veteran oral testimony, H.W. Williams, 1947. The flamethrower became a symbol of fear on both sides. For the Marines, it was the only weapon that could clear the labyrinth ahead. For the Japanese, it was a manifestation of annihilation, unstoppable, merciless. The flame came into the pillbox like a snake of the sun, one Japanese survivor recalled. There was nowhere to go. We were burned by the air itself. Post-war interrogation summary, 1946. But the weapon had limits. A full tank lasted only about 7 seconds of sustained fire. Each reload required returning hundreds of yards under enemy fire. Williams went through 7 tanks that day, nearly 35 gallons of fuel, dragging the spent ones behind him to avoid detonations. His gloves melted. His uniform smoldered. Still, he advanced. Combat Logistics Memo, 1945. His greatest test came on the northern plateau of Iwo Jima, near Airfield No. 2. The terrain was a maze of trenches and bunkers overlooking the landing zones. Japanese artillery commanded every inch of ground. When the 21st Marines tried to breach the line on February 23rd, they were pinned down by a network of pillboxes, linked in a deadly triangle of crossfire, casualties mounted by the minute. Division Operation Chronology, Feb 1945. Williams volunteered again. Crawling across 70 yards of open ash, he reached the first bunker, a dual embrasure pillbox guarded by a machine gun crew. He aimed the nozzle, squeezed the trigger, and unleashed a roaring plume. The vent pipe above exploded. The bunker fell silent. He turned, spotted another vent and advanced. Sniper bullets snapped inches above his helmet. "He moved like he was part of the fire," said a fellow Marine. "It was like watching a storm crawl." Eyewitness testimony, Sergeant M. Halverson, 1945. The second bunker was tougher. A grenade struck his tank and failed to detonate. He rolled into a crater, heart pounding, hands blistered from heat. Crawling on elbows, he approached from the flank, ignited again. The fire caught a cache of mortar rounds, detonating them in a thunderclap that lifted debris skyward. The shockwave knocked him flat. When he rose, the bunker was gone. U.S. Navy Combat Report, Feb 1945. Hours later, as the 3rd Marine Division pushed through, they found 7 bunkers destroyed, their interiors charred black. The field that had been impassable now lay open. For the first time, Marines could bring tanks forward, Sherman flamethrower variants known as POA CWS-75, built at Schofield Barracks under Colonel Unmacht's direction. Those tanks, combining the M2 flamethrower system with a 75mm gun, extended Williams' firepower tenfold. Bureau of Ships Technical Addendum, 1945. Engineers had learned from his actions. They refined tank-mounted flame units for sustained range, flames reaching up to 150 yards. "We saw what a man with a handheld unit could do," Unmacht wrote later. "Can you imagine what 20 could do, armored?" Flame Warfare Development Report, 1945. Meanwhile, Japanese radio intercepts revealed panic. Their commanders, trained for infantry assaults and artillery duels, had no answer for fire that flowed like water. Dramatized composite, quote, "The enemy uses flame that penetrates even stone," one dispatch read. "Our men lose their spirit. Many commit suicide rather than burn." Captured Communications, Imperial Japanese Army, March 1945. The psychological shock rippled through the garrison. Where flamethrowers appeared, resistance collapsed. Where they were absent, fighting raged for days. Williams' use of the weapon had shown that precision and terror could coexist, that even in modern war, ancient fear of fire still ruled the human heart. U.S. Naval Intelligence Bulletin, 1946. From an engineering perspective, the lesson was transformative. The flamethrower, once considered auxiliary, became central to marine assault doctrine. Design bureaus in California and Hawaii accelerated research into safer fuels, lighter tanks, and pressure regulators. Civilian contractors like the BT Manufacturing Company and General Electric collaborated to produce 14,000 improved units before war's end. War Department Procurement Summary, 1945. But every innovation carried a cost. Flamethrower operators had one of the highest casualty rates in the Pacific. The average life expectancy after engaging a fortified position was under 5 minutes. Williams' survival without so much as a wound defied statistical probability. Fellow Marines swore luck had nothing to do with it. "He wasn't lucky," said his commanding officer. "He was precise." Command Review Board, 1945. As Iwo Jima fell, reports of his exploits circulated through the Pacific theater. By April, his name reached Washington. Analysts studied his tactics as case studies in psychological warfare. How concentrated flame could break morale faster than bullets. U.S. Strategic Studies Group, 1946. On paper, the M2 flamethrower was merely a weapon system. In practice, under the hands of men like Williams, it was metamorphosis, an element of nature harnessed for human intent. Fireborn courage, one correspondent wrote, "the kind that lights the darkness rather than fears it." Pacific Stars and Stripes Dispatch, May 1945. What began as one Marine's desperate act soon became the blueprint for conquering the Pacific's final fortresses. Okinawa, Peleliu, and the caves of Kyushu yet to come. But with that revelation came questions more haunting than any flame. How far could humanity go in mastering destruction before being consumed by it? The engineers back in the States were already answering that question, with blueprints drawn not in grease pencil, but in atomic ink. Los Alamos Scientific Memo, June 1945. And as Herschel Williams left Iwo Jima's scorched ground behind, he could not have known that his war with fire was only the beginning of another kind of inferno, one that would soon blaze across the world's conscience. The fires of Iwo Jima did not die with the battle. They smoldered in the minds of men who had seen what courage and terror could do when fused in the same breath. When Herschel Woodrow Williams returned from the Pacific, the United States was already shifting its gaze toward the final act of the war. Yet among planners and psychologists, one truth stood out. The flamethrower had not just breached Japan's walls, it had pierced its spirit. U.S. Strategic Psychological Warfare Report, OG 1945. In Tokyo, intercepted communications revealed an empire shaken by the new tempo of war. Civilians whispered of American fire demons, who wielded heat that melted bunkers like wax. The myth spread faster than fact, echoing through the remnants of the Imperial Army. Japanese civilian intercepts, April 1945. To the Marines, that fear was a weapon in itself, one forged from the memory of Iwo Jima's inferno. When the Okinawa landings began weeks later, entire Japanese units abandoned positions rather than face flame. Commanders recorded cases of mass suicide inside caves, the walls charred black from within. 6th Marine Division War Diary, 1945. But for the men who carried those tanks, victory carried no triumph. Many could not sleep for months, haunted by the images of what the weapon wrought. Military psychologists described fire guilt, a term coined to define the trauma of those whose hands delivered death by burning. Naval Medical Psychological Report, 1946. Williams himself later admitted, "I never saw their faces, but I remember the smell." Interview H.W. Williams, 1948. To the High Command, however, fire was now science, not sin. Engineers who had studied Williams's performance wrote new doctrines emphasizing combined arms flame operations, infantry to pin, armor to deliver, and engineers to sustain. Marine Flame Warfare Doctrine, 1946. It was the birth of integrated assault, an early form of what decades later would be called combined effects warfare. The weapon's success transformed logistics. The Navy expanded production of flame fuel, thickened gasoline and napalm compounds, by 300% within 6 months. Rail lines from Chicago and Philadelphia transported 2.5 million gallons across the Pacific by July. Civilian chemists from Harvard and Dow perfected the polymerizing agents that kept the gel from separating in tropical heat. Bureau of Ship Supply Report, 1945. Every drop carried the legacy of that single Marine who had proved its worth under fire. Back in the States, Williams was unaware of the machinery his actions had set in motion. While engineers studied his tactics, he was demobilized, returning to a quiet town that barely recognized the boy who had left it. He carried no scars, but his eyes bore the weight of what he had seen. When the summons came to Washington months later, he thought it was a clerical error. Presidential Records Office, Oct. 1945. 13 men stood on the White House lawn that day, the final recipients of the Medal of Honor from the Pacific Campaign. President Harry S. Truman greeted each with a firm handshake. "I would rather have this medal," Truman said softly, "than be president." White House press transcript, Oct. 1945. When the citation for Williams was read aloud, the words seemed distant. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. He had never believed himself a hero. "I was just doing my job," he said later. The real heroes were the ones who didn't come home. Oral History Interview, 1951. Yet his story reverberated through the Corps. Military academies began teaching the Williams method, a model of small unit initiative where individuals acted as force multipliers. Marine Infantry Tactical Bulletin, 1947. His precision, composure, and audacity became the standard for what officers called calculated courage. Courage measured not by impulse but by discipline. The strategic ripples went far beyond the battlefield. The success of flame and demolition tactics convinced planners that psychological dominance was as critical as material superiority. Post-war studies concluded that enemy morale collapsed up to 60% faster when exposed to sustained flame attacks versus conventional bombardment. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The concept evolved into what the Pentagon would later term shock warfare, overwhelming the mind before destroying the body. But even as engineers celebrated efficiency, Williams wrestled with morality. He visited families of fallen comrades, especially the 2 Marines who had died covering his advance. "They were the ones who earned it," he said, tapping the medal pinned to his chest. "I just hold it in trust." Personal Correspondence, 1952. His humility became legend within the Corps, an embodiment of service above glory. The Cold War soon transformed those lessons. When American doctrine turned toward deterrence and nuclear parity, analysts saw echoes of Iwo Jima in their equations. If one man with a flamethrower could break an island fortress, what could a nation armed with atomic fire achieve or unleash? Rand Strategic Study, 1950. The metaphor of flame, once literal, became geopolitical. Control of fire, one strategist wrote, is control of fear. Air University Review, 1952's. In Korea and later Vietnam, Williams' legacy re-emerged through the mechanized descendants of his weapon. M132 flamethrower carriers, Zippo tanks and helicopter-mounted systems. Their operators cited Iwo Jima as doctrine, their manuals quoting his tactics. Yet even then, commanders debated the ethics of fire in modern war. "Every flame we use burns twice," wrote one Marine chaplain in Da Nang. "Once on the enemy, once on the soul." Marine Chaplains Field Notes, 1967. Williams himself avoided such debates. Instead, he dedicated his post-war life to honoring the fallen. In 2010, his name returned to headlines with the founding of the Herschel Woody Williams Medal of Honor Foundation. Its mission was not to glorify war, but to remember its cost, to build Gold Star family memorial monuments across America. "They lost part of themselves," he told one crowd, "and we must give them something that lasts." Foundation Dedication Speech, 2015. By 2020, more than 120 of those memorials stood in towns and cities from Hawaii to Maine, each bearing two silhouettes, one representing the service member, the other the family left behind. Between them, the void of absence, a symbol as haunting as the tunnels of Iwo Jima. Foundation Archives, 2020. Historians now see Williams as more than a hero. He was a hinge in the evolution of modern warfare, where courage fused with technology to redefine what men could endure. His story bridged eras, from the mud and ash of the Pacific to the digital command centers of the 21st century. The principles remained the same: precision, resolve, and the human spark that no machine could replicate. Naval War College Review, 2021. His medals rest today in museums, his name etched in stone, but the deeper legacy burns unseen, in every Marine who learns that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. When new recruits study assault tactics at Quantico, they still hear his name. The instructors tell them about a day in February 1945, when a lone flamethrower operator carved a path through concrete and chaos. And somewhere in the telling, the classroom goes silent. Marine Corps Training Curriculum, 2022. He died in June 2022, at the age of 98, the last living Medal of Honor recipient from the Pacific War. At his funeral in West Virginia, the sky was overcast, heavy with rain. As the rifle volleys cracked and the bugler's notes faded into the hills, a veteran whispered, "He carried the fire so the rest of us could live." Veteran Funeral Record, June 2022. In the end, Herschel Woody Williams left behind more than memory. He left proof that courage can be engineered, not by machines, but by the human heart tempered under pressure. His story remains a torch passed from generation to generation, illuminating what war reveals and what peace demands. And as history looks back on the Fireborn Marine who defied death on the black sands of Iwo Jima, one truth burns eternal. In modern war, the fiercest weapon is not steel or fire, but the will to stand alone when everything else has fallen.